Party. Let's get this party started. Oh my, I am so happy to be here with you all tonight. If you're on Cape Cod, you know it was a summer-like day, wasn't it? Um, the temperature is now going down and we are going to go back to more normal spring temperatures. But today was a summer-like day, which of course made me feel like I need to get some things done in the garden. I don't know about you, but that's how I was feeling today. So if you are watching me for the first time, if this is your first time on a happy hour Zoom, I would love for you to type that in chat. If you have been with me a lot, type that in chat too. I love hearing who is here. And I also like knowing that you can hear me and the chat is working well. Jessica, thank you so much. So that is kind of how we get started. For those of you who are joining me on Country Garden's Facebook Live page, you can type in the comments whether it is your first time here or whether you have been with me before, because I love to know. Now, for those of you who are first timers, first of all, you should know a couple of things. I can't see you, I can't hear you. You can be eating dinner, you can be enjoying a cocktail, the dog can be barking, doesn't matter, right? So that's a good thing about this webinar format. Secondly, if you have a question, chat is where you will type it, okay? And you can type it during my presentation or afterwards. What I do is I present my slides and my main presentation, and then we come out and I go to chat for the questions. Now, don't press on raising your hand. You might see that at the bottom of the screen. That's too hard to multitask and answer people's questions while I'm giving the presentation, and it's just too much. And Godzilla here, he's gardening, but he has not much help with the Q&A on Zoom. So if you have a question, you'll type it in chat and I will come back and I'll take as many as we can until 6 o'clock. If there are many that I can't get to, then by all means, I will answer them later. And I will do that because I will save the chat and then I will answer unanswered questions on the Hyannis Country Garden blog. So happy to be joining you. I hope you have something summery in your glass tonight. Could be an iced tea, could be sparkling water. I've got grapefruit seltzer here. I'm a particular fan of the grapefruit unsweetened seltzer. So I've got that in my glass tonight, and I'll have my cocktail on the deck after this is over, because it is a gorgeous night to be outside and things are popping. Things are popping. It is wonderful. So we are talking tonight about vegetable gardening in small spaces, and we are going to get right to it now. And I'm going to start to share my screen, and here we go. And we will play my slideshow, and here we are together again for our horticultural happy hour, growing vegetables in small spaces. So let's go. You know, not everybody has a property that's large enough to have a big vegetable garden like I do. This is my vegetable garden, or at least this is a part of my vegetable garden. My husband and I have a garden in our front yard at Poison Ivy Acres. That is about, our vegetable garden is about 40 by 40 maybe. And then we have other vegetables planted elsewhere outside of the vegetable garden as well. So that is what we are able to do because we have a lot of space, but not everybody has that space. So there are so many options for growing vegetables in small spaces, and we're going to talk about that tonight. First of all, you can grow vegetables in raised beds, of course, and there are any number of styles and kinds of raised bed. Here is a typical raised bed This one happens to be at the Barnstable County Fairgrounds in the Master Gardener's demonstration garden. And raised beds are typically 4 feet deep here across, right? And then however long you want to make them. The reason that they are typically no more than 4 feet is you need to be able to tend them from both sides without stepping in the soil. Because the whole idea of a raised bed is that you have well amended, good soil that never gets stepped on. And so it is looser, not as compact, and you can plant things densely, like you see here. This, I did a consultation for some people during COVID, and this was her COVID sanity project. She made these raised beds in her backyard, and they were basically 4 small squares where she had things growing. This is a raised bed that we've had for a number of years at Hyannis Country Garden as a demonstration model. And it's an example of a tall raised bed, one that you do not have to bend over. This is particularly good for people who don't want to have to get down on the ground. That's one thing. And the other good thing about a 3-foot tall raised bed is that the bunnies are less likely, not impossible, but less likely to eat out of this garden. And you can see how packed these particular beds are with vegetables, because again, when you have good organically amended soil, real dirt, we're talking real dirt here, not potting soil, because potting soil isn't real soil. Potting soil is made out of peat moss and vermiculite and other organic matter, but it's not real dirt. You want for vegetables, except in maybe smaller pots, you want real dirt. So here you can grow a lot of produce packed in really tight. There are any number of raised beds available. I took these pictures just 2 days ago out in front of Country Garden, so you can see what's available. All right. This particular model, I think, is really wonderful. It's lightweight. It's made out of the hollow piping and fabric. You can put it together and you are off and running. You have a raised bed. This is particularly good for people who maybe don't know if they want to commit to a permanent, something in their yard. It's also good for people who might want to try out in one place to see how things grow, and then they might decide the following year to move it. I don't know. But lightweight, easily set up, and fabric ends up growing plants very well. We'll talk more about that in a minute. These are quite popular now because they can go in 2 different style directions. Number one, they can look contemporary, and number 2, they can look agricultural. And these particular metal beds come short, medium, and tall. This happens to be a tall one, and easily, again, lightweight, pretty easily transported, handsome, yeah. And you can put them, just about any place on your property. Then there are wooden raised beds that, kits that you can put together. They look fantastic. And you only want, as I mentioned, a raised bed to be no more than 4 foot deep so that you can tend from both sides. You don't want to put anything on the bottom. If you get this, you see there's nothing, no wood on the bottom. You don't want to put landscape fabric or plastic or anything on the bottom. Don't think that that's going to prevent weeds. You're always going to have weeds. And if you're putting it, by the way, if you're putting a raised bed right on the lawn, put it right on the lawn and fill it with soil. And the soil is going to kill the lawn. The lawn is going to decompose, adding amendments into your bed. But the whole point of having a raised bed meet the ground is that the roots from your vegetables can go down into the native ground as well, and that produces bigger and better vegetables. So fill it with soil. Don't go for any of these rumors that you'll see online about logs or branches or debris. Have you ever heard of any farmer who grows crops on top of logs or branches or debris? No. And when you see that information online, most of the time it is drawings that they are showing you, not actual vegetable gardens. I have been planting vegetables for 50 years, and I have never, ever, or nor will I ever put logs or branches or other debris in the bottom of a container, a bed, anything. You want to use soil, okay? And by the way, soil that can be called topsoil, it can be called loam, right? But it is not pure compost. It's actual dirt. And chances are it's, got some sand in it, which is a good thing. Sand is good. We'll talk a little more about that later. If you have a low raised bed, you're probably going to want to fence for rabbits. But know this, rabbits don't eat members of the Solanum family. And those include peppers, eggplants, potatoes, and tomatoes. So in my property, we have our garden fenced for the bunnies, right? But outside of the fencing are the eggplants. Outside of the fencing are the potatoes. Outside of the fencing are some tomatoes. So don't be afraid of that in terms of rabbits. On the other hand, rabbits love beans, and they love peas, and they'll even eat leeks. They love chard, and they love kale and broccoli. So those kind of things you will need to protect from rabbits. In small spaces, boxes are particularly wonderful for planting, and you can put boxes on decks. You can put it on the sunny side of your house. You can have some in one place and some in another. Earth boxes have been long used by vegetable growers. You can fit 3 good-sized tomatoes and maybe a little lettuce in an earth box. Earth boxes have a water reservoir in the bottom, and you keep filling it up so that it wicks water up, and that works very well for keeping even levels of moisture throughout a hot day. You can use boxes that are up on stilts or up on legs. These are outside our store for sale right now. And these are good because A, you don't have to bend over. B, you can put these on a patio or a deck, and it's not going to, harm the deck underneath. You can even put some pots or various tools or whatever you want underneath these boxes on legs. And they can raise all kinds of things. This is in my friend Slim's garden, and she has these 2 boxes up on legs on her deck. And so she can grow all these vegetables, peppers and basil and lettuce and herbs and everything. She can tend them standing up, and the rabbits don't get to them. I have these in my yard. These are livestock troughs. They're on my deck. I don't grow vegetables in them, but you could grow vegetables in them. What I do with these is I put a crate and some upside down pots in the bottom, but you don't want to then put the dirt in because the roots of your plants will just end up down where there's nothing. You want to line them with a smart pot. Smart pots are fabric pots. They are made out of thick felt, non-woven fabric that lasts for years and years. We grow all our potatoes in smart pots here at my house, and I use them to line big containers like this. So they keep the roots inside and they grow plants very well. And then you can fill those smart pots with your potting mix and grow whatever you want in those. We have these outside of the store right now, very handsome, right? So if you want to grow vegetables in very handsome, classic containers, we have these, I think they may be I don't know what they're made out of, some sort of composite. They're not plastic. Maybe they're fiberglass, but in any case, they're made to be outside year round, and they come in a couple of different colors. And you see they have drainage holes on the bottom there. If you wanted to line them with smart pots, you could, but you could just fill them with soil so that you could grow any number of vegetables in these. They also are around 3 feet tall, so you don't have to tend over, and are really good looking. And I could see these with some chard and lettuce and maybe a pepper plant, and then cascading nasturtiums over the edges. And nasturtiums, both the leaves and the flowers, are edible. They would be stunning and very stylish. We have the same material in pots, and you can grow any number of things in containers. I'll show you the same variety of those boxes in a second. But any large container will grow vegetables on your deck or patio or wherever you put it, your front porch. For growing vegetables, you want the biggest pot possible. Last year, I had some trial peppers that somebody sent me, and I didn't have space in the garden, so I grew them in pots next to my garage. Worked very well. Tall boxes and pots keep the veggies away from the bunnies. You can also use grow bags or smart pots, and they come in small, medium, large, extra large, and even an instant raised bed size. I grow many things in these. I grow my eggplants in these. We grow potatoes in these. Here's one that is an instant raised bed planter. You can, take it home, unfold it, fill it with dirt, real dirt, loam, not potting mix, real dirt, fill it with dirt and start growing. I often recommend these to people who are not sure if they're fully committed to growing a vegetable garden. So maybe they don't want to invest in a real raised bed yet, right? Maybe they're not sure whether they're going to love it or not love it. If that's your case, smart pots and these instant raised bed planters are the way to go, because they're not very expensive. You set it up quickly, you fill it with soil. If you decide at the end of the season, this really isn't for me, you can empty the soil in any place that you need a little loam in your yard or garden, and you're done. But if you decide, I love this, I want to do it more, you can either have permanent raised beds put in, or you can just get some more raised bed smart pots. Smart pots, if you put them right on the ground, the roots of the vegetables will grow through the fabric right into the ground. But the good thing about them is that they air prune the roots up here, so they actually make denser root systems for plants. And that's why they grow plants so beautifully. I have mentioned that I grow eggplants in smart pots. We've grown all kinds of things, all of those members of the Solanum family. I can put them out here where it's bunny country in my garden. These are potatoes growing in smart pots, and the rabbits don't bother them. You can put smart pots on the edge of a driveway. You can put them on the edge of your property. Here is a rooftop garden with all of the vegetables growing in smart pots. I saw this garden on the rooftop of a soup kitchen in Quebec City, where they were growing a number of the ingredients for their soup kitchen right up here on the roof. Now, of course, if you're growing on the roof, you need to make sure your roof will stand the weight of those smart pots. So that is one consideration on a roof. But we also, in our solar heated seed starting shed, we use smart pots for growing lettuce all winter, because lettuce is a cool weather crop. And even though outside there's snow on the ground and it's going below freezing in my shed, it stays warm enough to grow lettuce in smart pots all winter. And when I was in Quebec City, I saw on the steps of the Parliament building, they had these big, round, instant raised bed smart pots, and they were growing corn and beans and cucumbers and all kinds of produce. And the point was to show people in an urban environment that you can grow food anywhere. And it is true. You can grow food anywhere there is sunshine. Now, if you want to dress up a smart pot a little bit, you can buy this fencing that we have at Country Garden, and you cut a piece and put it around the smart pot. Smart pots come in all different colors. At Country Garden, we have purple ones, which I happen to think you can never go wrong with purple. But you can, if you want to put some other sort of little fencing around them, you can do that too. So a lot of possibilities for these. And I can't tell you how well they grow potatoes. And what's wonderful, this was my husband doing the potato harvest. What's wonderful about these smart pots is while the potatoes are growing, in August, I can just put a glove on my hand and reach it down into the soil of the smart pot and fish around until I feel a potato, and I can pull it right up without disturbing the rest of the potatoes. And we can have freshly picked potatoes for dinner without having to do the whole harvest necessarily. So let's just talk a little bit about the soil. In raised beds and smart pots, you want real soil. It's often called loam. Some old-time Cape Codders pronounce it loam, or topsoil. That is not potting soil. Potting soil is not soil. It is organic matter, compost and peat moss and vermiculite or coconut coir. All right. If you are growing vegetables in pots, you can use potting soil. That's fine. But in the raised beds or smart pots, real dirt. And by the way, I forgot to mention, if anybody, as we're going over this, if you want to take a photo with your phone to remember something, please do, number one. Number two, this is being recorded, and the recording will be up on the Hyannis Country Garden events page in the future. And so you can go back and look at it there. It's also on Facebook Live right now. The slide quality isn't as good on Facebook Live because it has to go through Zoom and then to Facebook and then around the world 2 or 3 times before it gets to you. So if you want to see a better quality of image, then watch the recording once it's up on the events page. And all those recordings of these happy hours are at the bottom of the events page on hyanniscountrygarden.com. Now, this is what I don't want to hear from any of you. I have really bad soil. You do not. You might have sandy soil. You might have clay soil. But soil is soil. And frankly, if you have sand, you are one lucky camper, because sandy soil grows vegetables really well. And you can improve sandy soil in 2 ways. One, you can dump a couple of bags of compost or bumper crop composted manure on the surface of your sandy soil every year and amend from the top down, which is how nature does it. And you can use an organic mulch like you see here that rots from the top down, and you can see makes the soil richer on the top, even though you've got sand in the bottom. So you can work and grow beautiful, beautiful vegetables on sand. I grew up for part of my childhood in Stevens Point, Wisconsin, and it is sandy there. That's the part of Wisconsin where the glacier dumped pure sand. And the farmers in that area, the farmers, when Wisconsin was settled and then immigrants came in to settle it, the farmers all picked the good loam of southern Wisconsin first. But then the people who settled in the mid-Wisconsin area, they were discovered that this sand was perfect for growing potatoes, number one. And every year They have a festival of the golden sands that celebrates that. And a good portion of your potatoes that are Ore-Ida French fries in the freezer in every grocery store, those came from the sandy soil of central Wisconsin. So you amend soil, AKA loam, with compost. I'm a particular fan of both bumper crop and coast of Maine. I have already purchased a bag of bumper crop and added some to the soil in my smart pots that I grew eggplants in last year to help enrich it for this year. So that's already underway. Coast of Maine makes wonderful lobster compost. Both of these are wonderful organic amendments, whether you are growing in a container or whether you are growing in the ground. Deeper soil is always better. That's why you don't want to put plastic in the bottom of a raised bed. That's why you want to use as big a pot as possible. That is why you want to, use a larger smart pots and larger troughs and boxes. You want to plant where you have the most sunshine. Now, if your space is limited, you look around, and those areas that are maybe southern facing with no trees, or western facing where the afternoon sun is strong with no trees, that's where you want to grow vegetables. You can grow in a part shade, you can grow things like chard and lettuce, and some herbs you can grow, but you want the most sun possible. So if the most sun that you have is on your driveway, maybe you want to put a couple of big troughs or some smart pots on the, along your driveway. So look for where you have the most sunshine and you will have the most success. Now let's talk about vegetables that produce the most, because if your space is limited, you want to use vegetables that produce the most, don't you? So let's look at those. If I could, excuse me, I have to take a drink of my seltzer. Okay, if I could only grow one vegetable, it would be this Tuscan kale. And the reason is I can plant young kale plants in early May in my garden. I've got them going right now, and I will put them outside in early May. And then you harvest the old leaves first. And so the bigger, oldest leaves you cut off and you let the plant grow. And you can see the bigger, older leaves have been cut off of this stalk, and you can continue harvesting. I harvest Tuscan kale into January in my garden. By that time, they're 4 feet tall. They're still delicious. They go through several frosts. And so I can have fresh kale from my garden pretty much from June into January. So this is a good one. And it's gorgeous. Look at that. You could put this in any flower garden and it would look appropriate. You'd have to protect it from the bunnies because the bunnies do like it too. But it is a very long producing plant. And the secret, by the way, to preparing kale for no matter how you're going to, it can go in any cultural direction. But the secret is you cut the leaves off, you take off the rib, and then you slice it into ribbons. And then you do whatever you want with it. But you slice it into ribbons and it's delicious. Chard is another one that will produce all summer and into the fall. I can be picking chard until the first really, really hard frost, and that's often not until November. And once again, it's because you pick the oldest leaves and you let the small ones continue to come. Chard is far more productive in Cape Cod gardens than spinach is. And it produces so much more. You can chop it and freeze it, you steam it and freeze it. You can use it in any recipe that you would use spinach. So very long producing, wonderful crop. Beans are very long producing if you pick them every other day. If you don't pick your beans every other day, then the plant will think that it's produced all the seeds, it's done its job, and it will pack up shop and finish producing. If you pick beans every other day, you will be picking into September. So from about mid-July into September, and I still have beans in my freezer that we are eating. We eat frozen vegetables out of our freezer all winter long. I seldom have to buy any vegetables at all. So peas are wonderful, and peas are good in small spaces because you can grow them up. If you have a trellis or an obelisk, right, instead of growing a mandevilla vine, consider growing some food. And you can grow sugar snap peas. And what you can do is use that trellis in a double way. You can plant the peas on it now at this time of year and harvest them into the beginning of July. And then you can have cucumbers or pole beans growing on that same structure, and you plant those just a little bit into June so that they're cooking along and they start to produce later. So here, once the peas finish, there's the cucumbers on that same structure. And here's some pole beans that are going where there used to be peas. You pull the pea vines out once they are finished, and then you have the bean crop ready to grow. Broccoli can be long producing as long as you understand this. It only produces one central big head. And usually with home broccoli, that central head is not quite as large as the broccoli that you buy in the store. So know that. So as soon as it looks like this, it looks like a head of broccoli, right? You're going to harvest it. But then that plant will produce these for the rest of the summer. And if you go out every other day and pick these little side shoots, you have enough broccoli to put in an omelet or to steam for a salad or to toss with pasta and garlic and Parmesan cheese. I'm getting hungry. So those broccoli plants will produce those side shoots. And as long as you keep picking them before they open up into yellow flowers, you will have broccoli into the fall as well. Carrots are very good on Cape Cod. And so you can plant those, and you just need to know that you need to space your carrot seeds about 3 to 4 inches apart in order to get good fat carrots. So here's, some of my produce. I can go into my garden from July on every night at 5 o'clock and say, what's for dinner? And oftentimes look at the answer, right? The answer is broccoli and kale and summer squash and tomatoes and eggplant, and that's not to mention the arugula and the nasturtiums for a salad and the lettuce. So you can really produce a lot from a small area. Now let's talk tomatoes. In general, hybrid tomatoes produce more. The heirloom tomatoes have been very trendy in the past 20 years, and they are delicious, but they are much more prone to blight, and they are not as productive. So if you have a small space, you are much better off using hybrid tomatoes. And hybrids are more disease resistant as well. And these are some good ones for small space gardeners. Better Boy, Early Girl, Celebrity, Mountain Magic, which is bigger than a cherry tomato, and Mountain Magic is the most disease resistant tomato you can grow, and Sun Gold. And by the way, Country Garden is growing Mountain Magic tomatoes. So if you want to buy one already started to put in a pot, check in with us a little later in May. They go quickly, so you might start in May asking if they're ready yet. Stop into the store once in a while and check it out. It's Celebrity is all of these except for Celebrity are indeterminate varieties. And what that means is that they keep growing and producing and continuing to flower over a longer period of time, which means they get bigger. So if you are growing in a very small space and you don't have much way to support a tomato plant, You might want to consider Celebrity because that's a determinate variety, and it's a good one for Cape Cod. But all of these are good hybrid tomatoes. Here is Buffalo Sun and Sun Gold. Buffalo Sun is also a hybrid that won the All America Selection winner a few years back, which is how I got acquainted with it. And it's a wonderful flavor. And we have found it to be very productive. And it's not as early blight resistant as Mountain Magic, but it does the job. And you can see what the Sun Gold does here. They produce so many tomatoes that you almost can't use them all. By the way, if you have a bumper crop of these Sun Gold tomatoes, slice them in half, put them on a parchment paper lined cookie sheet in the oven, roast them until the edges just start to darken so that they're caramelizing a little bit, cool them, and then put them in bags and freeze them. And then you can toss them with pasta and Parmesan cheese and maybe some pesto that you've also frozen. And it is like you're eating out of a summer garden in the middle of winter. Delicious. So you can go up with plants, and on fencing or trellis, you can grow pole beans, you can grow cucumbers, peas, tomatoes, Malabar spinach. So if you're growing in containers, you might put an obelisk in that container, or some other upright structure that is attractive. You could put 3 or 4 tall bamboo canes and tie them at the top. You can even put a little upside down flower pot on the top of those canes to make it very attractive and cute. And then you grow up, and that can make vertical use of good vertical space in a small space. This happens to be Malabar spinach. Malabar spinach is not really spinach, but it kind of tastes like spinach. And it's a vining plant, which is quite attractive. Somebody gave me one last year, and it was quite wonderful on this obelisk. And you can grow pole beans, of course, vertically as well. So these are pole beans growing up on the same trellis that I had peas growing earlier in the season. Tomatoes you can put vertical, and here is these supports were with twine and stakes, but you could do the same thing in a small space in your garden. If you have a small space, these are things you might want to avoid, okay? Corn. Corn takes up a lot of space for a minimal harvest. You get 2 ears of corn per stalk, and it takes up a lot of space. Waltham winter squash, which is our butternut squash, right? Delicious, wonderful. If you have a lot of space, by all means, grow it. But it takes up a lot of space for a crop that you don't harvest until September or October. Now, there are smaller varieties of winter squash like honey nut or honey bear that you can grow up a little trellis. So look for those if you're short on space. Melons, you grow a long, big melon vine for 1 or 2 melons. Frankly, buy an organic melon in the store, because this takes up a lot of space for not much, and watermelons as well, of course. Cabbage also. Cabbage takes up a big space, and unless you really love cabbage, or you really want to make your own sauerkraut, it's a big space filler. Okay, we are going to get out of this now. I'm going to stop the share, and we're going to get to the chat questions. So if you've had a question, put it in chat, and I'm going to get back here to the beginning. You speak of garden soil. Is there any garden soil that doesn't weigh a ton to move? I live on a property and have a rather large incline. I move most things by dolly or wheelbarrow. Can you mix something with it to make it lighter? The problem with doing that is that it's, first of all, not going to support your vegetables as well. You are more prone to problems like blossom end rot on the bottom of your tomatoes if you lighten up the soil with something. If I were you, I would think about either coercing a young relative or a few young relatives with strong backs, or hiring someone to help you with that. All right. So if you're going to build a raised bed that's up an incline, I know that the soil is heavy, but have somebody help you out. I think that that's the answer, rather than making it lighter. Also, whatever you might lighten up the soil with is going to both dry out faster, then your soil's going to dry out faster in hot weather. And it's also going to, if it happens to be, please God, a wet summer, it might even keep it too wet in a wet summer. So I would find help to, get that soil up the incline and into your containers. Is it beneficial or a bad idea to put bricks on the bottom of a container that does not have drainage? If you have a container that does not have drainage, you need to put drainage holes in it. Bricks don't provide drainage. And any debris that you put in the bottom of a container that doesn't have holes, the roots are not going to stop when they get to the bricks or the stones or the whatever. The roots go down in the place where there is either too much water and there's no nutrition, So never use a container for plants, unless it's aquatic plants, that doesn't have a drainage hole. Have some holes drilled in any container that doesn't have a drainage hole. Do groundhogs invade smart pots around our yard? Well, they have in the past, and here's the thing about groundhogs. Groundhogs are one of the hardest animals to control because they eat just about everything. They eat tomatoes, they eat just about everything. They do have certain preferences. In my yard, they will go for the winter squash foliage over things like the eggplants and the potatoes. And the key with groundhogs is to try and get them to move elsewhere. And the way you try and get them to move elsewhere is you dump dog poop or used kitty litter down their holes, because they are very fastidious animals and they don't want to live in poop. So do that if you have groundhogs. You are not allowed to transport them. My neighbor does trap them. What he does with them, I don't know. But in any case, you want to, and if you have a problem with groundhogs, fencing does work, but the fencing has to kind of go down under the soil a little bit. And then the key is up on top. The fencing should be a little loose, so that if the groundhog starts to crawl up the fencing, the loose part bends back and dumps that fat groundhog onto the ground. So that's my groundhog. And if I have time at the end of our time together here, if we don't have questions to fill the whole thing, I'll tell you my groundhog story. What size smart pots do you use for potatoes? We use 25-gallon smart pots for our potatoes. They are at least 2 feet in diameter. The bigger, the better. And the way we do it is we put 6 inches of soil in the bottom, real dirt, okay? Then we put 3 seed potatoes on top of that. Then we put 6 more inches of soil and 3 more seed potatoes on that, and then top that with 6 more inches of soil, and that, about 18, 20 inches deep of soil. Then we get potatoes that are growing throughout the entire smart pot. So we harvest enough potatoes that, I make twice baked potatoes and freeze them, and we eat them all winter. What does comfrey and corn work well together? What grows well with borage? Well, if you want to plant comfrey and corn, you can. Most people who have planted comfrey, particularly in small spaces, regret it because it spreads like crazy and you can't get rid of it. And I have faced this myself. I will never plant comfrey in my life again. If you have a big farm and you want to plant comfrey for some reason, and by the way, it used to be used medicinally and people now know that it's carcinogenic. So they don't, Do not grow it for medicinal plant. If you want to grow it for some other reason, like chopping it up and using it for green manure or something, just make sure you have a lot of space and you like how it looks, because it will be everywhere. I remember one of my first garden visits when I moved to the Cape was to Harry Walker's place in Yarmouthport. And I asked Harry Walker, I said, have you ever planted anything that you regret? And he said, oh, yes, Russian comfrey. So, you can grow other things in and among corn. There's the famous Three Sisters planting where you plant beans, pole beans up the corn, and then you plant squash on the bottom to shade the soil. And certainly you can do that very well. Corn is a pretty heavy feeder, and you have to plant corn in blocks, not rows, because it's air pollinated, not bee pollinated. And so you need to have a pretty big block of corn. So it's not something that I recommend for small spaces. What grows well with borage? You can plant borage any place, and it often self-seeds. You can plant it in among your vegetables. It's good because it attracts bees. It's kind of a pretty plant. So plant it on the edge of a garden, plant it in your herb garden, put it in a flower garden, put it in a container, just about anywhere you can plant borage. Growing horseradish, once again, you gotta love it because it spreads and you will never be rid of it. My husband and I for 25 years had a plot in the community garden at Marston's Mills. And the woman next to us, our second year there, planted horseradish. And we had horseradish plants coming up all over our garden for the next 25 years until we left that garden. So make sure you really love horseradish. Yeah, because it's going to spread quite a bit. How much space do I need to plant rhubarb? Well, actually, if you have about a 3-foot by 3-foot square in full sun, or better yet, 4-foot by 4-foot, but 3 feet by 3 foot, you can plant rhubarb. And rhubarb goes very well in a flower garden. So you can mix it in with flowers, right? You could put it on the edge of a garden. You could put it in front of shrubs. It's quite attractive through most of the summer. So you can just, do it anywhere. You have a 3-foot by 3-foot start. Does Country Garden sell veggies we can plant? If so, when do we start to plant? Yes, we do have veggies. In fact, we've got the cool weather veggies that you can plant now. What you can plant now is peas, lettuce, herbs, broccoli, kale. You can put carrot seeds in the ground now. You can plant collard greens now. And we have all of these plants in right now. Later on, we will have all the manner of beans and tomatoes and eggplant and peppers and all of those. You can't put those into the ground until the nighttime temperatures are reliably above 50. Usually on the Cape, that's the 3rd week in May, sometimes not even till the 1st week in June. If your raised bed is filled with good loam and topped with bumper crop, do I need to have my soil tested every year or so? Good question. Well, I would have that soil tested, first of all, once as a baseline so that you know what's in it, all right, nutrition-wise. Also, a soil test will tell you if you need to fertilize, and if so, what fertilizer you might want to use. So that's number one. If you are fertilizing regularly, you probably want to have a soil test done every 4 or 5 years, because some of those nutrients will build up in the soil over time. And so there will be a time when you should not fertilize, because having too much nutrient in the soil is as bad as having not any at all. So I would say for most vegetable gardens, whether it's a raised bed or an in-ground, I would have a soil test done every 4 or 5 years so that you know what you've got. What about watering in a dry summer? That is a good question. I hope we don't have another summer like last summer. It's very stressful. But You want to water deeply, less often. Now, we have to, of course, abide by town regulations. There are some towns that limit how much you can water or when you can water, right? But the worst type of watering you can do for established vegetables is hand watering. And that is because you get bored long before your bed is evenly soaked. And it is hand watering that creates most instances of blossom end rot on tomatoes on Cape Cod, because people only saturate the area right around the tomato stem and they forget that the roots are out on the side where the soil is dry. So my vegetable gardens in most of the summer, we water with a sprinkler that goes back and forth. We put it on in the morning. We do it for 3 hours once a week. Once a week. That's how we water. For our water pressure, for our town where I live, that is what we can do, and that works very, very well. Your water pressure may be different, your sprinkler might be different, so you need to figure out how long it takes to soak the soil down, a good 10 to 12 inches, but that's how long you should water. And for most plants, once a week is good. Now, of course, in the beginning of the season, when the seedlings are tiny and they don't have deep root systems, I might go out with a watering wand and water those tiny little plants by hand. That's perfectly fine when plants are smaller. But once they get bigger, you want to saturate the area. And another thing that helps with that, of course, is mulching. Whether you're mulching with chopped up leaves or hay, or we have this wonderful pine needles that are wonderful vegetable garden mulch, a country garden. And we have a hay product called Mainly Mulch that works very well. And mulch helps keep moisture in the soil as well. Deep soaking less often in the morning is always better than a little every day. When can I harvest California garlic? Well, all garlic on the Cape gets planted in October, and then we harvest at the end of June or the beginning of July. And you will know it's time to harvest your garlic when the leaves of the garlic start to turn yellow. And you can tell that the plant is ready, it's done its job, and it's ready to check out, and that's when you pull it. And then you can use that space in July, right, to plant more crops. We typically plant more kale, we plant carrots, we plant arugula, we plant lettuce, we plant all kinds of fall crops in the area where the garlic grew. What grows well with nasturtiums? Just about anything. Nasturtiums scramble around in and among plants. So any plant that is taller than a climbing nasturtium, you could grow with nasturtiums. Nasturtiums actually have, I'm just looking here to see if I have that book. I don't have it next to me. Nasturtiums have been shown by scientific studies to help keep squash bugs away from squash. So there are people who intercrop nasturtiums among squash. A lot of the companion planting information that gets circulated, like marigolds keeping insects away, is not true, okay? But the nasturtiums around squash, that was proven by a controlled study. So you might want to try that. We grow nasturtiums just about anywhere around our vegetable garden. On the corners of the rows, we will plant them because not only are the blossoms edible, but the leaves are edible as well. So I would not be without nasturtiums in my garden. Grow them from seed so that you can grow the vining and climbing varieties, not the little dwarf varieties. The ones that are sold in 3-packs or in pots are the dwarf varieties, and you don't get as much food out of those. But the vining varieties are wonderful to plant just about anywhere. You can put them in window boxes to cascade over window boxes. And in fact, nasturtiums are ideal for containers where you're growing upright plants like tomatoes, and because they can cascade over the edge. And by the way, nasturtiums are great mixed with basil and pesto. So works very well. And nasturtium flowers in fish tacos, fabulous, fabulous. Are strawberries a good choice for a small garden? Only if you like feeding the chipmunks. If you enjoy feeding chipmunks, by all means plant strawberries. Strawberries make a good ground cover in a small garden, but you will probably not get fruit because the chipmunks, the critters, get it first. Strawberry farms are able to harvest strawberries because they are acres and acres of strawberries. And so they're able to get a harvest, but it's one of those small fruits that the chippies love. Last year, I grew some strawberries in pots just so I could take pictures of them. And I think I was able to harvest 3 berries for myself before the chipmunks discovered them on the deck in the pots. Okay. Recommendations for planting cauliflower. Well, cauliflower you can plant fairly early, right? And there are several varieties of cauliflower. You want to give it enough space, like broccoli or the Tuscan kale. You want to, and cabbages. You want to plant them a good 2.5 feet apart from each other. They need a lot of space. The only problem with cauliflower in small space gardens is that you only get one harvest. It's not like the broccoli that you can pick the main head and then get all the little ones for the rest of the season and, you know, have a whole summer's worth of broccoli side shoots. Cauliflower is a one-shot deal. So again, you gotta love cauliflower if you're growing it in a small space because it's going to take up a big space for most of the summer. And, you know, and then it's done. But like all the other things like broccoli and all, full sun and, you know, enriched soil. Is there a good plant to plant with strawberries or raspberries? Not really, not in terms of useful. You know, the problem with raspberries being thorny is if you plant anything around raspberries, it's going to be harvesting it is going to be a little pain in the neck. I suppose you could put those strawberries around raspberries, but again, you're going to compete with the chippies for those strawberries. Best way to get rid of invasive blackberries: pull them, cut them, dig them, pull them, cut them, dig them, and do it regularly. Because if you keep on blackberry patrol in that area, you know, that's the way to get rid of any invasive plant or any vigorous plant like the blackberries, is if you keep denying it photosynthesis. Because the roots, in order to keep putting up new, they need photosynthesis to sustain their life. And so if you go on patrol every week and cut them off, you will deny that plant photosynthesis, and eventually you will get a handle on it. What about zucchini and summer squash in a small garden? That's fine, but look for some of the smaller varieties. Look for seeds of smaller varieties. If you are growing zucchini in a pot, if it's a pot that's about this big around, you can only grow one zucchini plant in it. So just know it's going to take up a lot of space. So big containers, smart pots would work, big ones, but one plant, you know, in a container is it. Do I use Osmocote? No, Osmocote is a synthetic fertilizer, and I only use organic fertilizers in my vegetable garden. I might use a liquid synthetic like Maxi if I felt a plant was in trouble, or if I knew from a soil test that it was, you know, wildly deficient, which my garden is not. But Osmocote is best kept for annuals. If you don't mind a synthetic fertilizer in a container for vegetables, by all means use it. You know, I think that that's fine. But not for a big vegetable garden. I wouldn't use Osmocote. I'd use tomato tone or, you know, plant tone. Do you plant grapes? We have a big grape arbor. It produces a lot of grapes of the Concord variety. That is the variety of grapes that does the best on Cape Cod. You got to keep it pruned, and you know it's if you're doing it for grape production, the pruning and you have to devote a fair amount of space for it. But Cape Cod can grow grapes quite well, as you've seen in the vineyards in Truro, right? Can you tell me about growing boysenberry? Um, you know what? I have no experience with boysenberry. So the answer is no, I don't know anything about it. I'd have to look it up, and I've never grown them here. So we grow raspberries, we grow blueberries, which we net for the birds. We grow blackberries, but I have not grown blueberries. And we are getting toward the end of asparagus beetles. Help. I think, if I'm not wrong, I think Captain Jack's, which is spinosad, might be labeled for asparagus beetle. So I would try that, number one. Number two, diatomaceous earth. DE is your best friend in a vegetable garden. You water grow bags when they're dry. You should only fertilize if a soil test shows that you need fertilizer. If it's outside in a small garden, an application of tomato tone or plant tone in the spring is probably all you're going to need, but I would have a soil test done. And we are at the end of our time. It's time for dinner, and after talking about food, I'm hungry. So I hope I see you at Hyannis Country Garden. Come in. If you have any problems, I'm there every Friday to answer your questions, so come and see me. And if I'm not there, we have a big staff ready to help you out with all the pleasures and the problems in growing vegetables. Have a wonderful weekend.